You know that feeling, that nagging sense that there's maybe something more going on, just beneath the surface of everything we see.
Mm-hmm.
In part one of this deep dive, we really dug into how your own mind, well, actively shapes the world you experience.
Yeah, the red space idea.
Exactly. Now get ready, because we're taking that same kind of mind-bending idea and expanding it to the entire accessible universe.
And welcome back, everyone. This is part 2 of our journey into the Abstractionists' papers. A really unconventional book, makes you stop and think about reality itself.
It really does.
As you said last time, we looked at how individual minds construct their realities. Now we're scaling that up, applying those same principles to, well, the cosmos.
Absolutely. And just a reminder for everyone, if you want to read along or dive deeper later, the whole book, The Abstractionist Papers, is totally free online.
Correct.
Just go to www.welcometothe.bluespace.com.
It's definitely worth checking out. Seriously. So, for this deep dive, we are tackling all of part 2, every chapter. The goal is to really get our heads around what the author calls the natural reality framework and introduce this concept of the blue space. That's the sort of causal world, the engine behind things that exists beyond our individual minds.
Right. The red space.
Yeah. We'll look at how reality seems to organize itself and try to unpack this really key idea of emergence, how new stuff arises.
And it all builds towards part 3, which is coming up next.
Right. Okay, let's lay the groundwork then. This natural reality framework. What is the core idea?
Okay, so basically the framework suggests reality operates through two fundamental domains. They're independent, orthogonal is the word the book uses, but they constantly interact.
Well, orthogonal, like at right angles.
Exactly like that. So
Yeah.
first, you have the causation domain. The book calls it the blue space. Think of this as the underlying machinery of reality, where things just happen based on their own rules, whether anyone's looking or interpreting or not. Okay, so that's the raw, what happens, the cause and effect engine room.
Pretty much. And then orthogonal to that, you've got the interpretative domain, the red space.
Ah, our territory from part 1.
That's it. This is where individual processes, and for us, primarily, our minds build their own unique internal model of reality. So everything you experience, your thoughts, feelings, perceptions, that's all happening inside your red space.
It's like we each have our own personal operating system running, interpreting the input from, well, from the blue space, I guess.
That's a really good way to put it, yeah. And the crucial bit is that orthogonality. They're independent, like time and frequency maybe, or real and imaginary numbers. Different aspects, they interact where they meet, but one doesn't dictate the internal rules of the other.
So blue space provides the events, red space builds the meaning.
You got it. Causation and interpretation. Interacting but distinct.
Okay, the book uses this story, Thera and the apple, to make it concrete. Can you walk us through that one?
Right, Thera. So she sees an apple fall. Simple enough. Happens all the time.
Standard gravity stuff.
Standard stuff in her experience. And she looks up at the sun. It's just hanging there, seemingly unsupported, but it doesn't fall.
Ah, okay, so she has a rule in her head, unsupported things fall. Apple follows the rule, sun breaks the rule.
Exactly. And this creates a paradox, a puzzle in her mind. She's applying her Earth-based rule to the sun, and it doesn't match what she sees.
And the key point the book makes is that this contradiction, this paradox, isn't actually a flaw in reality itself, right? The universe isn't broken.
Precisely. The paradox exists entirely within Thera's reasoning, within her red space interpretation.
Not in the blue space.
No. The blue space just operates. Gravity, orbits, massive objects exerting force over distance. Those are the causal rules at play. Thera's red space has a useful but limited rule derived from her local experience. The clash is between her internal model and the external causal reality. Her expectation, sun falls, bumps up against observation, sun stays put.
And if she could somehow step outside her assumptions, even without knowing why the sun stays up, the feeling of paradox would vanish.
That's the idea. It reveals what the book calls incoherence, a misalignment, a mismatch between the internal interpretation and the external causation.
Okay, incoherence. That sounds important.
It's central, and it leads to this concept of natural spaces. The book suggests we can understand reality by looking at these fundamental cause and effect zones. And natural space, let's call it N, is a domain where things interact according to a specific rule of causation. They use the Greek letter psi for the rule.
Psi. Okay, so ed dictates how cause leads to effect within that specific natural space.
Exactly. And within these spaces, every effect involves two things: change the actual transformation, symbol delta,
Oh, for change?
and decay, symbol lambda. Think of decay as the sort of inherent resistance or maybe energy loss in the interaction within that space.
Okay, so change happens, but there's also this decay aspect. And how they interact determines the outcome.
Right. Does the interaction help something persist? That's constructive. Does it break it down? Destructive? Or does it not really have a lasting impact?
Neutral. It's shown in Figure 12 in the book. Gotcha. Constructive, destructive, neutral. Based on change versus decay.
Now, here's a really key point. Not everything within a natural space reacts to its governing rules, psi, in exactly the same way. Some things are more resistant to change than others.
Oh, like inertia.
Very much like inertia. The book calls this causal impedance. They use Z with a little psi subscript, Z.
Z, causal impedance. So high impedance means it's tough to change. Low impedance means it's easily influenced within that specific space's rules.
Exactly. It's how much kickback you get when you try to apply the rule of causation. The book explicitly links it to things like Newton's second law, mass-resisting acceleration, or Ohm's law in electronics resistance impeding current flow. It's a measure of resistance to change within that context.
Okay, that makes sense. So most things just interact according to the rules of their natural space, encountering some level of impedance.
Right. But sometimes an interaction introduces a kind of change that doesn't quite fit the established rule side. It's sort of off-kilter. This is what the book defines as incoherence, symbol delta.
Okay, so delta is incoherence. And it's different from just regular change, delta.
Very different. Incoherence isn't just change within the space. It represents a shift out of that natural space's framework. It's like trying to move orthogonally, perpendicular to the existing rules. And crucially, incoherence actually increases the causal impedance, Z, relative to that original rule.
Whoa, okay. So being incoherent makes you more resistant to the old way of doing things.
Yeah. Think about using a screwdriver as a hammer, like your analogy earlier. It's not designed for that incoherent use, and trying to hammer with it actually makes it less effective as a screwdriver afterwards, maybe damages the tip, increased impedance to its original function.
Okay, that helps. So this incoherence, this delta, builds up.
Exactly. As incoherence accumulates through interactions over time, a process can reach a point where it just doesn't really operate according to the original natural space's rules anymore. It starts interacting based on a new set of causal relationships following a new rule. This accumulation and shifting is the core idea behind general selection.
Ah, and that leads to the emergence of completely new natural spaces.
Bingo. The book pictures it like layers. A foundational purple space, maybe representing basic physical laws. Then, as incoherence builds up, new green spaces emerge, think biology, and then maybe even higher order red spaces on top of that, like cognition.
Physical, biological, cognitive, like Figure 14 shows.
Right. But, and this is super important, the book stresses that these spaces, purple, green, red, are our interpretations. They're models we use to make sense of deeper underlying causal dynamics. They aren't the raw stuff of reality itself. That deeper structure, the blue space and its fullness, is something Part 3 gets into more.
Okay, so the universe isn't static things. It's this dynamic network of interacting processes, each with an inside and outside and a boundary, like Figures 15, 16, 17 try to show.
Exactly. And it all hangs together based on two big principles. Parallelism. Each process builds its own reality internally, independently.
Like our individual red spaces.
And orthogonality. No process can directly peek inside another's internal state or model. All the interaction, all the influence happens through the shared causation domain, the blue space.
Like computers on a network. They run their own software but talk via the network cables.
That's a perfect analogy. So within our interpretive domain, our red space, we experience these layers, purple, physical, green, biological, red, cognitive, but they feel seamless, right? Like one continuous reality. Figure 18 touches on this.
Yeah, totally seamless. The blindfold idea, we don't usually perceive the boundaries between physics, biology, and thought as like fundamental divides.
Exactly. But maybe that little feeling we get sometimes, that quantum stuff feels weird or deep space feels different. Maybe that's a faint echo of the incoherence separating these interpreted natural spaces.
Interesting. And the last key bit from Chapter 4 was induction, right? How processes influence each other without direct access. See Figure 19.
Right. Since you can't directly transfer meaning or internal states, influence happens via induction. One process interacts with the blue space, creating conditions that another process then interprets and responds to, generating its own internal state change.
And the book points to light as the key mechanism here.
It proposes light as the fundamental way this happens. Light mediates the interaction. It's the bridge between the blue space of causation and the red space of interpretation. It carries the potential for interaction, but the interpretation happens in the receiver.
Okay, wow. That's a lot for Chapter 4. Universes, processes, blue space linking them, incoherence building up, leading to new interpreted spaces like physical, biological, cognitive.
That's the gist. And it sets us up perfectly for Chapter 5, which dives right into how that change actually happens, general selection and emergence.
Right, so Darwin's natural selection is huge, obviously, but the book suggests it's maybe not the whole picture.
Yeah, it acknowledges Darwin's massive contribution, especially for biological adaptation. But it argues natural selection is mainly focused on biology and maybe struggles a bit to fully explain true emergence, where radically new things, new forms, new functions seem to pop into existence.
Things that aren't just tweaks on the old design.
Exactly. So, general selection is proposed as a broader principle. It governs change in both the causation domain, blue space, and the interpretive domain, red space. And it introduces this idea of a natural reality axis to kind of measure these shifts in causal impedance driven by selection and that crucial incoherence factor.
A way to track the upward movement of emergence.
Sort of, yeah. And the engine of general selection is this repeating cycle, shown in Figure 20. Interaction happens, leading to variability. Then selection acts on that variability, favoring certain traits or responses. And those favored traits accumulate over time, feeding back into new interactions.
Interaction, variability, selection, accumulation.
Yeah.
Loop.
A recursive loop. And the key is, this loop doesn't just explain gradual fine-tuning. It also provides a way to understand those bigger jumps, the transformations that create new levels of organization.
Which connects directly to emergence. The book makes a distinction, doesn't it? Horizontal versus vertical selection?
It does. Horizontal selection is like Darwin's finches adapting within the existing constraints. Different beak shapes for different seeds, but still finches, still on the Galapagos.
Fine-tuning the existing system.
Right. But vertical selection is about breaking out of those constraints, creating entirely new possibilities, like, say, the jump from non-flying ancestors to creatures with wings. That's a vertical shift, enabled by navigating between the causation and interpretation domains in a new way.
And incoherence is the key to that vertical jump.
That seems to be the argument. Remember causal impedance, from Figure 13? Variability constantly tweaks that. But when incoherence is greater than 0, it allows change to happen in a way that's orthogonal to the standard decay. It lets the system sidestep the old rules.
Okay, so incoherence opens the door to moving up the natural reality axis, to break constraints.
That's the idea. It allows bypassing the established limitations. So emergence isn't magic. It's seen as this continuous part of evolution. These cycles of selection produce stability sometimes, but also these moments of transformation when enough incoherence accumulates and gets sort of integrated.
Leading to new ways of organizing things.
Exactly. New principles, new structures, built by integrating these previously incoherent changes. And the visualization the book uses for this is really striking the spiral. Figure 21.
Right, the spiral, not just a flat circle of change.
No. From our viewpoint, stuck in the interpretive domain, maybe evolution looks like variations on a theme, a flat circle. But if you factor in the causation domain, extending orthogonally, that circle becomes an upward spiral, constantly moving towards novelty, complexity.
And it connects this to the yin-yang symbol.
Yeah, it's an intriguing analogy, suggesting that what looks like balanced opposition from our perspective might actually be this continuous spiraling dynamic happening in the causation domain, a dynamic mostly hidden by our biological blindfold.
Wow, okay. And there's even a mathematical connection proposed, like Euler's equation, Figure 22.
It's used as an analogy, yeah. Just like interactions between real and imaginary numbers can trace out circles or spirals, interactions between the orthogonal interpretative red and causation blue domains drive this spiraling trajectory of emergence along that natural reality axis. It connects seemingly unrelated things.
It's a way of visualizing how these different layers or domains interact to produce something new.
And Figure 23 uses another analogy, transparent boxes stacked up. From the top, they look jumbled together, but from the side, you see the distinct layers, the natural spaces, separated along the causation axis. The whole general selection loop, viewed properly, isn't flat. It's that ascending spiral.
Okay, and the train analogy helps make incoherence more concrete.
Right. Coherent interaction is like running on the tracks, maybe faster, maybe slower, maybe jumping up and down, still on the tracks, still governed by the train's reality.
Destructive, constructive, neutral interactions within the system.
Exactly. But an incoherent interaction is stepping off the tracks entirely. You're outside the train's direct causal influence in that way.
But just stepping off might not be stable.
Right. That's where harmonized incoherence comes in. It's like finding or building a stable platform beside the tracks, a new way to persist, related to the train's environment, but not bound by its rails. That's emergence, finding that stable, new way of being.
And this often starts small, little variations building up.
Yeah, the book suggests small interactions build variability, kind of priming the system for bigger disruptions.
Yeah.
It's about creating new causal spaces, which then need to find that harmony to persist. It distinguishes between evolutionary change refining the existing game and revolutionary change rewriting the rules entirely.
And this applies everywhere.
That's the claim. The chapter gives examples like flight evolving, antibiotic resistance, industrial revolutions, AI development, language evolution, even thinking about thinking metacognition. The argument is, general selection is the underlying pattern for how all significant change happens.
So transformation kicks off when limits are exceeded, and emergence is just the world continuing, but in new ways.
That's a good summary. It demystifies emergence, makes it a natural consequence of these interacting domains and the accumulation of incoherence.
Okay, powerful stuff. Which brings us to Chapter 6, the engine driving all this interaction and emergence. Light.
Yes, Chapter 6 focuses squarely on light. But not just light as we measure it, photons, waves, Maxwell's equations, quantum mechanics.
Which are mostly about measurement, detection.
Exactly. The book acknowledges those descriptions but wants to look deeper at light's role in causation itself, how it propagates through the blue space. The proposal is that light isn't really a substance, but the fundamental process by which causal influence extends.
So light is the mechanism of influence spreading.
That's the core idea, and because it's fundamental to influence, it becomes the basis for all measurement. How we detect light wave-like, particle-like depends entirely on the process doing the detecting, how we choose to engage with it.
So wave-particle duality isn't necessarily about light-switching states, but about how we interact with the underlying process.
That's the implication. It reflects our engagement pattern, not necessarily an inherent property of the light process itself.
And it challenges the idea of light carrying information.
Yeah, big time. The common idea is light transmits data like a fiber optic cable. This book argues, no, light presents variation. It initiates the potential for interaction. The receiver then constructs its own response based on that interaction. Perception isn't receiving a message, it's building an abstraction internally.
Okay, so in the natural reality framework, light enables causation to propagate. It sets the conditions for interaction.
Right, and it has those two aspects we touched on. An electric component linked to interpretation, the red space response, and a magnetic component linked to its propagation through causation, the blue space. Wave-particle duality mirrors this propagation versus detection aspect.
And this ties back to induction, figure 24.
Exactly. Influence spreads via interaction, propagation. Induction is when one process triggers a new causal event in another process through this propagated influence. It's crucial to see induction as triggering a response, not transmitting content. Light is the medium for this inductive coupling between, say, the blue space and a red space.
And this coupling can be one-way or two-way.
Right. One process influences another one way, or they influence each other back and forth, leading to feedback loops, maybe even resonance if they sync up.
And impedance comes back in here too.
Yep. Causal impedance, Z, is resistance to this propagation. The flip side is admittance, the ease of propagation. The book shows some simple formulas like E, AC, and C, relating effect E, admittance A, causation C, and impedance Z.
And it applies across different spaces, like blue to red.
Yes, it shows a formula like air equals aired, F blue, C blue, to illustrate how the effect in the red space, eared, depends on its own admittance, responding to the causal conditions, C blue, propagating from the blue space, mediated by light. Induction is a transformation.
Okay, this is getting deep. It even talks about limits to induction, gravity at small scales.
Yeah, this is pretty speculative, but fascinating. It suggests maybe at the Planck scale, things are too simple, their causal impedance to gravity is too high for them to interact gravitationally in the way larger things do. Maybe that's why a proton isn't a black hole.
Whereas light seems to propagate everywhere.
Right, which leads to the really radical idea. Maybe space itself isn't fundamental. Maybe space is part of our interpretation, our red space way of organizing the relationships revealed by light-speed interactions.
Whoa. Okay, so if space and time aren't fundamental governors.
Then they become interpretive constructs, ways we organize interaction patterns. Movement is our measurement of sequential interactions. Time arranges transitions. Space frames relationships. Universal expansion becomes the growing reach of causal influence.
And the Big Bang.
Reinterpreted not as time's beginning, but as the limit of our current explanatory models. The point where the processes defining time as we know it hadn't fully emerged yet.
So the cosmos looks different through this lens. Stars are propagation centers. Black holes aren't endpoints. Galaxies are interaction fields.
That's the picture painted. Stars propagate influence. Black holes maybe involve propagation continuing beyond the event horizon, just not engaging outwardly in ways we detect. Galaxies are these huge swirling fields of interaction. Maybe the spirals reflect propagation patterns. Emergence is the ongoing story.
And causation itself is continuous propagation, read sequentially by interpreters. Redshift reflects this ongoing propagation.
Yes. And every process has its causal footprint in the blue space and its interpretive presence in a red space. The book notes patterns in this propagation, storing potential, regulating flow visible everywhere from springs to ecosystems.
Communication becomes signals-inducing responses, meaning arising in the responder. Scientific models track response patterns using space-time layers.
Exactly. And reconciling quantum mechanics and relativity might involve understanding this deeper causal propagation and the incoherence between scales. It all comes down to receptive responsive behavior, how plants use sunlight, how senses work. Induction depends on the receiver's ability to engage.
Which brings us back finally to the double-slit experiment and wave-particle duality.
Right. The explanation here is it's all about engagement, no measurement. Light propagates through both slits, interacts, continues as a wave process, creating interference.
But if you measure which slit it goes through,
Measurement forces a discrete, localized interaction, a particle detection. The process is forced into a specific response within the interpretative domain at one point, preventing the spread needed for wave interference.
so measurement collapses the wave, not by magic, but by changing the interaction.
It brings the continuous causal flow, blue space, into a specific interpretive response, red space. The underlying propagation continues, but the response is localized. It contrasts QM's wave function collapse with this idea of continuous propagation plus interpretive response.
And gravity is impedance, navigation is engaging new conditions.
Yeah, understanding propagation lets you potentially reconfigure context. It all ties together. Light enables causation and induction. This pattern, at all scales, drives emergence.
Okay, wow. That was a journey through part 2. We covered the natural reality framework, the blue and red spaces, how incoherence seems to drive emergence via general selection, and light as this fundamental inductor.
It's a lot to take in, but it offers a really different perspective.
It really does. It circles right back to that initial feeling that maybe there's more going on. This framework gives a way to think about that more, a new way to see the universe, and maybe our own lives within it.
And we're not done yet. Next time, in our next deep dive, we push further into part 3 of the Abstractionists' papers. We'll explore the causation domain, the blue space itself, in much more detail.
Cannot wait for that. And again, seriously, if this has sparked your curiosity, check out the full book for free at www.welcometothe.bluespace.com. Start looking around you, see if you can spot these dynamics, this interplay between interpretation and causation. So here's something to chew on until next time. As you go about your day, where do you see that line?
The line between your interpretation of things and the events just unfolding. And could any little glitches, any incoherences you notice actually be the start of something completely new?
Good question.
Keep thinking on it. We'll see you for the next deep dive.